Breaking down one of the most intriguing offenses in the NFL heading into the 2024 season. That is what we are going to do today on RotoViz Overtime. We're going to talk through the Chicago Bears and which players would be preferred targets at their current ADPs and how things might shift over the course of the offseason. Shawn, we haven't talked a huge amount about the entire Bears team. We have talked about the potential of stacking it. We've talked about the wide receivers. We've even talked about the running backs. We've kind of done it on separate shows and during draft. So we are going to talk about them a little bit more on today's show because I feel like there's an offense where if you get the answers right, it could have a huge amount of upside in 2024. But there's a number of pieces that you have to work through to get to that point. So we are going to do that on this edition. I'm excited for it, Shawn. How are you feeling as we kick off here on Monday? I know you just finished up the Best Ball breakfast with Peter Overzet. You can obviously subscribe to the Best Ball Banana Stand podcast feed and get those episodes once they are available. But every Monday you can catch Pete and Shawn over there. But Shawn, how's it going this Monday as we kickstart the week?
Good. We did a listener league FFPC Superflex Best Ball Tournament draft yesterday. The listeners did a fantastic job. Those are going to come out the following week, Colm.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to that. We had the 101, and so we did some things that maybe don't perfectly match with the Best Ball Workshop articles that have come out recently. I did have the piece that I had been teasing, the 5 crazy prices in the FFPC Superflex tournament. Check that out over on the site. I do think those guys are dramatically undervalued, and you can do some damage by making those picks. Colm, we've had great work out on the site this last week. Some things that if you are just on the listening side, you might consider getting that 1-month sub. Certainly, you mentioned the RV Radio 2024 gives you the 10% on the 1 year. Kevin has had some great articles. He may come on OT in the near future. Jake Bowes had a fantastic piece simulating Best Ball Mania, thousands of seasons, millions of teams. Anybody who's playing that format, you won't want to miss it. And Michael Dooner is going to have a piece on that as well. Again, head on over to the site for those pieces. We're going to be talking today about an article that Blair Andrews wrote on Rome Odunze and diving a little bit more into the Chicago Bears passing attack. Calling a lot of new pieces in Chicago, but it is, well placed or well positioned to potentially be this year's Houston Texans.
Yeah, it's gone from an offense which last season there was a couple of pieces of interest, but like if you were drafting a Justin Fields team at the time, DJ Moore had come across, that would be of interest. Colm was of interest. There was some running backs in the later stages, of interest, but it wasn't quite as, interesting as it is right now. Obviously, they draft Caleb Williams in this year's draft. They add DeAndre Swift in free agency. Then they have their trade to get Keenan Allen across. They draft Rome Odunze. Gerald Everett's even come into the mix here at tight end along with Colm. So there's, it's very diversified in terms of the way this offense could play out. So they are putting their young starter in a very promising position. But then it's a case of, which parts do we want to have on our roster? So, Shawn, I guess we can kick it off with the wide receivers. And you mentioned Blair's piece on Odunze. When we look at DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Odunze in terms of where they're being drafted, there is quite a gap, not a huge gap, but we're looking at in the 25 to 30 ADP range for DJ Moore. Then you're into the kind of 45 to 55 range, depending on which drafts you're in for Keenan Allen, and then you're dropping down another round to a round and a half to get down to Odunze in this particular setup. Keenan Allen has been the one that I have found myself drafting more off this group, but I am interested as well in Odunze. I haven't drafted a lot of DJ Moore so far this offseason, just based on the price difference between the trio of wide receivers that are in this offense. I know you and Ben did pick him up in one of your drafts last week over on Stealing Bananas. The wide receivers here, as things set up, I guess disregarding the ADP side of it, what is your opinion of this trio heading into the season? And then does that become wider based on ADP, or is ADP something that maybe makes it a little bit more intriguing for you? How are you feeling about the three guys? And is it a case that maybe DJ Moore is that little bit feels expensive this year? And it's felt tricky because Moore has been somebody that I've loved throughout his entire career, and now we get, what maybe is a potential step up here in quarterback, might be the best quarterback he's potentially ever played with, and it feels like we're saying that he's too expensive. So how are you feeling about this group of wide receivers?
Yeah, so we pull up FFPC, we'll pull up the regular Best Ball Tournament ADP, and the great thing about the Chicago Bears is that they have a Week 7 bye, and they are one of only 2 teams that have that Week 7 bye. And then when you're looking to play them in the playoffs, they have Minnesota, Detroit, and Seattle, other teams where you have compelling players to pair them with. So the first thing is that if you're playing this in any sort of tournament, the Bears are one of your best teams to target. But that ends up being a much lesser importance than just the flexibility they also give you, because we have DJ Moore sitting there at wide receiver 22 in the early 4th round. In the middle of 6, you have Keenan Allen at wide receiver 33. And then at the end of 8, you have Rome Odunze at wide receiver 44. And that's followed by Colm in the middle of 10 as the tight end 16. In the passing game, even ignoring the 3 interesting options at running back, you have 4 different ways you can play it at 4 completely different price points. So you're able to balance those exposures at different prices through the draft, and in different types of drafts where you have a different draft slot or you have other names who become a priority at the point where you might be looking at a Chicago Bears player, you can push those guys down. So you mentioned with DJ Moore, one of the issues there is simply that he's the most expensive of the 3, and that in some ways makes him the hardest to get. Now, we look at DJ Moore, and one of the reasons he is the most expensive of the 3 is that he is the guy at a peak age who scored extremely well last season and has been very healthy as we work our way through the various years of his career. So when he comes in last season as the wide receiver 9 in points per game, you're getting him at wide receiver 22. And then you go back and look through and he's averaged well over 200 points from 2019 to 2022. And then last year is the true mega breakout where he gets to 292 points. 3 straight years where he's played in all 17 games. The 2 previous seasons, he missed just 1 game each. So many things they're stacking up to make him an excellent pick, certainly at wide receiver 22 in comparison to where he finished last season. Wide receiver 9 in points per game, wide receiver 6 overall, because again, he played in all 17 games. I think you have to love that price in the FFPC. The names immediately in front of him: Cooper Kupp, Devontae Smith, Michael Pittman, Deebo Samuel, Malik Neighbors. You can understand why those guys are going earlier, and yet that's the range that you want to be in. And so I like that. The running backs, Isaiah Pacheco goes ahead of him. I think that's probably a mistake, although I'm not particularly unbiased there. He's a little bit less expensive, obviously, in FFPC because 6 tight ends have already gone, and he is going right at the same spot as Evan Ingram. I think you probably have to prefer DJ Moore there. But the interesting thing is that while you're getting a discount on DJ Moore, you're also getting Keenan Allen at wide receiver 33. Colm, Keenan Allen finished number 3 last year in points per game. If you look at the last 2 seasons combined, Keenan Allen is number 4, and the only 3 receivers who have finished ahead of him are Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb. Right? I mean, you're talking about the guys who go 1 and 2, and the guy who is the best receiver in the NFL. Those are the 3 players who have scored more points per game in the last 2 seasons than Keenan Allen.
Yeah, that Shawn, there's no other way to say that. That's obviously exceptional. Keenan Allen in the past maybe is somebody that we would have given that age bump to, obviously, and moved him down. But again, a little bit like, and it's a tease for the draft that we did this past weekend, the players that are kind of in that range are now being valued appropriately, in terms of the running back position. But I feel like there's an overcorrection here on Keenan Allen with the move of team at this particular point of his career. That also for me is a concern for DJ Moore at his particular price, that kind of pumps the brakes a little bit when that selection can be made or can come into consideration. And unless it was a case that the other players in that tier had gone, that would make it very hard for me to make that pick of DJ Moore with that Keenan Allen play in your kind of back pocket that you're hoping to get a couple of rounds beyond that. Then the other part that comes in, you have a lot of moving parts. So we get DJ Moore, who comes over last year. We get Keenan Allen, who's coming over this year. We also get the rookie who's coming in, but we also get a rookie quarterback. And it's trying to evaluate all those pieces together. So it's not just a straight scenario of this player is coming into this offense so we can decide how he impacts the offense. The other pieces that are moving around it, and then, with coaching staff, the organization, there's a huge amount just in flux at the moment with the Chicago Bears. So the part, I guess, as we move into Odunze now and we link it to Blair's article, looking at the player, which is, Shawn will have written him up and talked about him throughout the draft process in terms of the RotoViz rookie guide. But there's a lot of those things that I just mentioned that go into beyond the player's talent. So you're evaluating the player's talent, but then you have the landing spot, you have the situation that he's in, you have the coaching scheme. There's a lot of pieces that go into it. The thing that makes it a little bit trickier then, as Blair points out in the article with Odunze, is the, situation that he has found himself in is quite positive. But the other part is there isn't a huge amount of examples where a wide receiver who has gone in to this situation is getting drafted in the first 10 rounds of fantasy football drafts, but also has two other wide receivers, kind of going in that range above him at that particular point, and then how they have fared out. But there is a few of those guys who have come in and fared out extremely well, but there also is a couple of those cases that would kind of make a little bit of a cause for concern. And the other part with those particular names is they weren't all coming in as well with a rookie quarterback to be part of the mix with it also. So, Shawn, with Odunze, first on the talent element, and then kind of the things there with the, the quarterback situation with the two, I would say, obviously, certainly more experienced, but potentially better placed for 2024 success at wide receiver in front of him. How are you kind of balancing all that out? Do you think the ADP reflects all that fairly, or do you think that maybe with the two guys in front of him, Odunze maybe is a little bit higher up the board than maybe he should be in this situation?
So Blair has broken this down by looking at some of the different elements that people are going to be emphasizing when considering a rookie wide receiver. And obviously that draft position is one that comes into play very strongly. He shows that in the article. We know that Odunze went very early. The Bears have made a big investment. And when you have, I believe, the final year production that Odunze had, and you have that draft slot, you can be fairly comfortable with what the floor is likely to be, especially when you're thinking second half of the season. The other element that Blair then looks at is this EP balance. So the expected points that you're gaining or losing onto the team. The problem that you run into here with the Bears, obviously, is that they've added Keenan Allen with already having DJ Moore. And so this is a situation where the available volume is not there. And one of the things he points out is that since 2017, EP balance has a slightly stronger correlation with rookie wide receiver scoring than draft position, right? So the idea that expected points available matters is backed up by the research. The other thing that he notes is that it actually suggests that worse QB play will be better than strong QB play. But he also notes that the likelihood there is that that's also sort of a function of draft position, that the lesser teams with the worst QBs have earlier draft picks, and the early draft picks are what you're looking for, right? And so there are confounders in that element of it. He also then looks at it from this perspective of player ADP and average teammate ADP, and again finds a similar element where the higher the average ADP for the rookie wide receivers teammates, the fewer points that player is likely to score. But some of those things are dwarfed by the player's own ADP, right? So when we're thinking through that, where Odunze himself is being valued is going to be a stronger signal for us than where his teammates are being drafted. So that, again, is going to balance out a little bit some of our concerns there. But then he throws in this kind of final note that's very interesting, and it goes back to your original point with Keenan Allen, which is that where a rookie wide receiver's teammates are being drafted is actually not quite as strong a signal as how old the teammates are. And when you have old teammates, it does open the door. And so for me, the question is, what do you do with Keenan Allen and his age, where we are so dramatically discounting him already because of the age? The other thing there, with Keenan Allen, is that I think there's this temptation to not give him full credit for what he's done, right? I mentioned that over the last 2 years, he's the overall wide receiver 4 in terms of points per game. Colm, the year before that, he scored 260. The year before that, 249. Before that, 261. Before that, 262. The year before that, 284. He's on a massive run of 250-point seasons. And the other thing that we do tend to see is that even with an older receiver like that, that the previous season matters a great deal in terms of predicting this season. And that also, and this even goes back to research from RotoDoc, but again is, I think, intuitive, is that the higher the peak, the greater the receiver was, the better he's going to age, or in terms of how we see the range of outcomes, the more likely he is to either still hit on a high outcome or to decline, but decline into an outcome that's still good.
Yeah.
And so another way that we can kind of test this is pull up Dave Cabin's newly updated range of outcomes tool. And Colm, the range of outcomes is absolutely fantastic. When you look at the wide receiver position, Dave's work here, which again, I think that you want to look at these things from multiple directions, and you want to retain your skepticism at each different point and not let yourself get all in on a certain player because of one piece that you see. But again, Keenan Allen has scored so many points that he is tied with AJ Brown as the number 3 projected receiver. It's very difficult for me to believe that wide receiver 33 is an accurate reflection of where he should be going. And even then, when we consider his age, that we want to understand that the risks for him coming off of a massive season are probably different than the risks for even a slightly lesser type of player who's younger. Keenan Allen at 32 is probably less of a concern than some of these other guys at 29 and 30. So Colm, we've got a lot of interesting pieces of information here to think through and to balance. And for me, the biggest takeaway is that this Bears passing offense is even more talented than we're probably giving it credit for, and that Caleb Williams is probably a better pick than his ADP indicates. Now, when we think through Caleb Williams, he's the other key part of this. If he doesn't execute, then where the 3 receivers are is going to be less relevant. And that part of it is a little bit controversial, and it kind of depends on what you're looking for Caleb Williams to do himself as a fantasy scorer versus what he allows the receivers to do. Anybody who wants to take a deeper dive into Caleb Williams, you can do that by going to my Rookie 101 series piece on Williams. Some of the important notes there are that when we look through the last 3 years, he was very good. I don't know that there's a season that jumps out as being extraordinary, but we break these down. We look at some of the things that Travis May has talked about in terms of correcting for jet motion and play action, some things that are going to really inflate the production of QBs. But one of the things I wanted to look at here is that beyond 2022 and 2023, where he played well, Caleb Williams, even as a freshman, was extremely impressive. You look at these plays with those elements removed, you look at plays of only 6+ air yards, and his results are right there with names like CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. And yeah, we have Stroud go nuclear last season. We have Young look like an absolute bust. And yet there's a reason that Young was the number 1 overall pick. There was a reason that Stroud was still in the mix to be the guy who went at the top. Obviously, that's one of the things that has been very controversial for the Carolina Panthers, even though in retrospect, it was a very obvious play. I mean, there were people in Carolina who wanted Stroud to be the pick before any of that happened because he was that good. Well, Caleb Williams, as a freshman, a much better touchdown percentage on those types of plays than either of the guys. He has an IQR, which is SIS's proprietary QB rating, where you remove the elements of sort of receiver play that are not on the quarterback. He's right in there with Young and Stroud on that. Anytime that you have a very young player who was sensational from the first moment he stepped on a college football field, that's going to give you more confidence that that guy can translate it very quickly to the NFL field, especially if he's surrounded by these types of players. And then the next piece is that we go down through when we look at him as a runner, and you see one of the reasons that his rushing value plummeted last season is that he scored or gained a lot fewer yards on designed runs. When he does run, his evasion rates are really high. He's a very dynamic runner. He has the potential to score a lot of points on designed runs. So if you're looking at purely from a fantasy perspective for him, I think you've got to be excited by the fact that he's got these 3 elite receivers. You've got the good tight end, and he's going to score some rushing points. But the flip side of that is that his willingness to scramble, and certainly his willing to scramble without pressure, is very low compared to a lot of the other mobile or hybrid QBs who have come in since 2018. In that article, I compare him to Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, Anthony Richardson, Jaden Daniels. The scramble numbers are so much lower that it reinforces this situation or this context where we can expect him to pass the ball if he has that option. So if you're looking at DJ Moore, you're looking at Keenan Allen, you're looking at Rome Odunze, there's the potential for the passing volume in Chicago to be high enough to help out those players. Now, is it high enough for an individual guy to be a true league winner if everybody stays healthy? That's probably a separate question, but we certainly want to be aware of what some of these outside factors are or what the offense is going to look like. And I think we want to be aware of the fact that while a passing offense from a rookie QB could end up being lower volume as they help him adjust to the NFL, there are some counterbalancing types of things to where if you're really scared of Williams' mobility, because he's an absolute stud as an athlete, right? He's going to be able to make people miss. He's going to be able to extend plays. There's going to be some of that Russell Wilson element to it where you're using the mobility to then be able to hit guys deep. And I would say that I think that some of the things that they did in college for him at USC were probably not that conducive to putting up the big numbers, whereas the people he's going to be surrounded with, and especially in 2023, but you look at what's going to happen here in 2024 as a rookie, there's reason for a lot of excitement. I'm skeptical about the offensive coordinator still, but certainly the early returns on Williams himself have been extremely encouraging. Now, I mean, some of that is just baked in. You know, you're going to get a lot of puff pieces on the number 1 pick. But there's just a lot of reason for enthusiasm right now, to where I think that Chicago needs to be not necessarily a foundational part, but a meaningful part of your 2024 draft plan.
Yeah, the other part, we're going through those wide receivers so far, and there is the three names that you're looking to, how will it all work out? But behind those three names, there's pretty much absolutely nothing at that particular position. I mentioned tight end. You touched on a Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett. I think Kmet's clearly the leader there, but I'll get your thoughts in a minute if you think there is anything to look at with Everett. I think then it gets quite interesting at the running back position. And, we were very enthusiastic about DeAndre Swift last year. It was, for managers who had him rostered, was quite a frustrating season because obviously the tush-push situation with the Philadelphia Eagles took a lot of potential touchdowns for running backs off the board, but it also was a case that he did get tackled into the 5-yard line quite a bit. But we have DeAndre Swift, we have Roschon Johnson, we have Khalil Herbert. And the part that's interesting with those guys is Swift's going in that kind of 0 RB range, in the 90 pick range over at the FFPC. But we have the other two names that I mentioned, Herbert and Johnson. They're both going in the kind of late 100s, 180 through 200 for those two guys. How are you viewing the running backs here? Because there's, it's not expensive to get them onto your roster. And if this offense is going to be what we're kind of hoping it potentially will be in terms of scoring points, that should open up avenues here for that position as well. How are you viewing the Bears running back situation?
DeAndre Swift is a name that I think you want to get some of, right? I have him ranked slightly ahead of ADP, but you look at the three guys who go ahead of him in round 6 of this FFPC Best Ball Tournament, and you're looking at Kenneth Walker, Aaron Jones, Ramondre Stevenson. Those guys are better selections.
I think they have to all be gone, but if they're all gone, I think he's interesting. I think you don't want to be left with no Swift, whereas, I think this is what you're going to say. Those three guys are definitely players that should be drafted ahead of him.
And you look into round 7 then and see the guys going after him, the players he could fall into that group with. David Montgomery, a pretty clear backup in terms of 2024 likely usage. Zamir White, someone who appears to be a clear starter, but in a weaker offense. And with his NFL bona fides really not proven. Then you have James Conner, who was fantastic last year, but has this threat with Trey Benson behind him. Then you have Jonathan Brooks, who may not be healthy. Najee Harris, who probably not the best back on his depth chart. Jaylen Warren then is interesting. Zach Moss, probably not the best back on his depth chart. And then Raheem Mostert, again, who is interesting. It's tough in some ways, I think, to take Swift over Warren and Mostert, and those guys are easier to get. At the same time, you probably don't want to let yourself get into this position where you have an extreme share of both Warren and Mostert. One of the ways that you balance that out a little bit is by taking some Swift. And then certainly at the very end of drafts, you want to sprinkle in Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson. Herbert, someone who has proven himself as a dynamic threat at the NFL level. Johnson, someone who could be a high-value touch machine if things fall out the right way. If Swift disappoints, like he very clearly did last year with the Philadelphia Eagles, then I think at that point the contract becomes a little bit less relevant, and we could get Roschon as the guy who is both the goal line back and the receiving back. If you're splitting touches, but those are your touches, you're going to crush from that spot. So those players also interesting in this particular offense.
Yeah, and I think what we're, as we talk through it, what is pretty much the case is you want to get access to all of these guys, even if it's a case that, I mentioned with DJ Moore, if he's, the players that I would usually draft around him go off the board, or just in general, if he's after ADP, I think you want to get access to all of the pieces of this offense because we expect it to have such upside for this season. When I'm saying all pieces, Shawn, teaser again for the draft coming out, Cole Kmet was a player that we kind of maybe didn't fully agree with potential pick selection, and we bypassed him and we didn't get him. So Cole Kmet is interesting, I think, in the building through Bears lineups, but Gerald Everett, is there anything there, or is it clearly Cole Kmet's the only option? Gerald Everett usually going, in the undrafted ranges of all formats.
I'm going to go with Cole Kmet as being the answer.
I just wanted to check that. I know Jared Leffert has been somebody we've talked about in the past. So let's just that's that debate solved. It's Cole Kmet. But the next time we draft, maybe I'll agree to take him a little bit earlier and he won't go off the board. But Shawn, as we get ready to close out, any final thoughts on the Bears? I think we've covered it probably pretty much all of it there. But the other part, outside of the running back position, the depth behind those 3 wide receivers is non-existent. Some of these rookie quarterbacks will have veterans behind them where there is a case that maybe they don't go in straight away. That is not the case here. It is pretty much the players we have talked about, and I don't think anyone else that's going to get involved. The other part I would re-mention is Blair's article is up on rotoviz.com looking at the Odunze information around him. Any final thoughts on the Bears, Shawn?
Well, again, just the Caleb Williams gives you a good option there, toward the back, certainly not at the back, but a good option there in the middle of the QB window. It can be difficult to get Dak Prescott early in 8 because you still have so many different opportunities. Jordan Love, if you have it set up properly, is a very dynamic selection. When you look at the elite QBs versus the window QBs for this year, to me, Jordan Love is the guy who is most likely to make that jump and to smash his way into the elite QB group next season. So I think you want to get a little bit there. Jaden Daniels, the most exciting player going early in 9. And then you have these extremely solid picks in Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, Tua Tagovailoa. In that same range with those 3 names, you get guys like Caleb Williams and Trevor Lawrence, exciting selections who could be league winners, but even if they're not, they do a lot for your roster. Make sure you're aware of Caleb Williams. And even though he's not going to do from a rushing perspective what Jaden Daniels is going to do, he's also more likely to stay healthy. In terms of the most dynamic players in this group, I think you've got to like Williams, even with all of the rookie aspects, as someone who could play a full season, who could start from week 1, has a hybrid profile, has the weapons, and will improve as it goes along. And one of the things with Williams' price is that you're probably looking at him as being someone that drafters think of more in that range of the, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, Baker Mayfield types of guys for the first half. But if Caleb Williams is more like, a Patrick Mahomes or a CJ Stroud, a Joe Burrow, a Kyler Murray for the second half of the year, you're getting that at the key juncture, at the key moments of the fantasy football season. I think you want to structure your roster so you're getting a discount on second half and fantasy playoff production.
Awesome stuff. So that is going to do it for this kind of team preview. I know Shawn and Ben have done a number of these on Stealing Bananas. If there's any teams that you haven't heard broken down that you would like to hear on some of the shows coming up, do let us know on Twitter at Overtime Ireland or emailed across at rotovizradio@gmail.com. That is going to do it for this edition of RotoViz Overtime. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. You can check out all of Shawn's work on rotoviz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.